Hello, Collectivites. This is Acoustic speaking, presenting to you the Wanderstar Report, the internet show all about Collective, the community-created card game. Now, even though I am just excited, as I'm sure everyone else is, about what's to come, I do still have to take some time to establish what our show is all about, well, with it being the first episode and all. The Wanderstar Report is split into 3 parts. First, I'll look at the winners of the previous week of cards, giving my thoughts and analyzing their potential impact on the standard environment. Future episodes will also do the same for any balance updates that get accepted. Second, I will highlight a few cards, both from those up and running on this current week, and those who were submitted last week but didn't quite make the cut. For these cards, I'll primarily give my thoughts and potential feedback as for how these cards could have a better chance of being accepted. The final part of the Wanderstar Report acts as a showcase for both notable events within the collective community, along with various creations of other community members, such as deck lists. Now that I've set the ground rules, I've kept the show waiting for long enough. So without further ado, let's dive in to the week review. Mirrored Pair is your average unconditional copy effect with the ability to scale well into the late game thanks to its surge effect. At first glance, I can imagine this seeing use in control decks based around one or more large units you want to copy, such as Overictic. Outside those niches, however, historical precedent tells me this will struggle to find a home, as can be seen with Biobrilliance and Clonify, 2 copy cards that coexisted in the same standard, with the expensive unconditional copy being generally outclassed by its cheaper but more restrictive counterpart, though perhaps in this lower power level we could see as have more widespread use. Personally though, I wouldn't count on it. As the first of what Suyatlo admin Pwapka considers the beginning of new daylings, Cryptic Islander is a powerful disruption tool on a stick for the low price of 2 mana. The sigil tokens provide pressure to the opponent by either prompting a mana tax or buffing your board if they don't pay. Personally, this card scares me due to how many sigils it can pump out, which will make it hard for the opponent to both contest your threats and get the tokens out of their hand. I have a feeling either the summon or the entomb will be cut in a balance update later down the line, but I could be wrong. Atomic Resuscitation is a strong tool for reanimator decks, perhaps a bit too strong even. The revive effect on this might as well not be there. You play this for the mass cost reduction effect. Most revive effects in our game have some sort of cost limit, and being able to circumvent those limits opens up playlines beyond what may be intended. This can get even more out of hand if you plays more than once, and your lesser raised deck starts bumping out 9 mana worth of units for the price of 3. Personally, I like to believe that we put limits on effects like this for a reason, so a card like this so early in the new standard and for this cheap just sorta rubs me the wrong way. Putrid Poison is a potent 1-drop for spirit decks, especially bulk aggro. To me, a poison or damage over time effect never really made sense to me in most card games, since the average unit only lasts for 2 to 3 turns at most, leading to these types of effects having generally minimal impact. However, this dynamic completely changes when you slap the ability to poison anything on Entomb on an aggressively statted 1-drop, which lets the card create pressure on the defending player simply by existing. The Entomb also makes the card a potent blocker, allowing for easy 2-for-1s against swarm decks. I expect this to get knocked down to 1-1 at some point in the future. From the mind of new designer The Magical Bear, Gemhawk is an interesting hand refill tool and another decent top end for spirit aggro decks. To compare with its biggest competitor, Vexing Voidborn, the Hawk has a weaker and frailer body, in exchange in a stronger keyword in flying over the Voidborn's overrun, and a cost reduction effect on top of its draw effect, making it a potentially stronger play on curve. The end of turn effect is definitely the part that makes the card spicy, as some may call removing itself from play and forcing yourself as your next draw a downside. However, I'd say the sheer value the summon provides means that being able to play that summon over and over and over again, as long as it doesn't die, should prove invaluable at not running out of gas towards the end of the game. It remains to be seen if Gemhawk will overtake Voidborn as the de facto bulk 5-drop, if it fails to break free from Voidborn's shadow, or if the two can somehow coexist. Either way, I'm looking forward to seeing how the card's performance pans out in the metagame, and I'm looking forward to seeing what other designs The Magical Bear has cooking that head of theirs. A card from Collective's past giving a chance at redemption. Scraggy Imp is this game's answer to the Flame Imp of Hearthstone fame, as an overcurve 1-drop with an added cost to your health. However, in the case of Scraggy, you can also use the health of your other units as payment. This aspect can make the card both stronger and weaker depending on the board state, synergy notwithstanding. For the most part, I think this is a good card to have as a relatively simple one-drop that provides a nice push for faster-paced strength decks. It also pairs nicely with the upcoming new hero, who has a general theme of gaining power from using their health as a resource. However, I think the fact that the damage takes place over 5 separate pings could lead to it restricting the design space of future Rage or Pain cards. If that does become a problem, I would suggest condensing the damage into larger chunks so the Imp isn't potentially triggering 5 Rage effects for 1 mana. Other than that, I think it's a nice addition to the current standard roster. Correct, Blind Beauty is another one of the new Daylings, and I don't know how to feel about it. Its base body is frankly terrible, having a stat line identical to unkillable Kudzu, but with can't attack. Bear in mind that Kudzu is probably one of, if not the worst cards in the current standard card pool. Tract does salvage this with its ability to give any unit in your hand regenerate. With this, you could turn any duelist into a discount Gemhawk, or just give some more survivability to any particularly high HP value engine. I myself am skeptical of how this card will perform, at least initially. Perhaps in the future, Trekt will have a lot more targets for its regen granting, and there we may see it shine. For now though, the card looks okay at best. Soulmender is a card I honestly think is slept on. A 2-mana 1/4 is a really nice defensive stat line for a card like this. The active is unassuming, but can be useful for situations where your opponent wants to remove one of her units, but will require multiple passes to do so. In those cases, Soulmender's active can protect your unit from dying, and sometimes protecting a single unit from death can be the difference between a win and a loss. And even if the active isn't always useful, its beefy body makes it a solid blocker. You can also use it to heal up your duelists after they duel to improve their longevity. Right now, I can't see a specific deck that wants this type of card, but I have a hunch that it'll prove its usefulness in due time. Smokestep Oni is honestly just kind of bad. Its body is very weak for an aggressive unit, and it has no built-in evasion, meaning in most cases, it'll just get chump blocked and not do much. And even if this somehow manages to connect with the opponent's face, the effect you get out of it isn't even that strong. Sometimes the null part of the effect can even work against you, such as against Marie or Hawkins, or really any strategy that makes use of the graveyard. In its current state, Smokestep Oni is just too weak to really find a home in any deck. And I personally want to see it buffed, because I do think it's an interesting design. The balance just isn't all there at the moment. Perhaps it could have unblockable for the first turn enters play, so at least you're guaranteed 1 proc of its effect. Gestating Aberrant is such a confusing design to me. I guess the idea is that you just hold this thing in your hand for a bunch of turns until it gets super big and then it wrecks house. However, due to the fact that the buffs it gets are both weak and random for some reason, this card never actually reaches a point where it becomes on curve, let alone over curve. Seriously, why are the buffs random? It bloats the text box and adds unnecessary complexity to an otherwise pretty simple design. Obviously, this card is practically useless in its current state, but honestly, I don't want to live in a world where this card is buffed to be a mana threat. Mostly because I think the type of gameplay it promotes, i.e. stalling with this card in hand until you get a big bingus that wins the game for you, to be incredibly boring and unfun. Slag Slammer is bonkers. Like, I know that in the current metagame, bulk aggro is running amok, beating most other decks with a near 100% win rate, but this very much reeks of a nuclear solution. This unit alone has the potential to kill 4 units each time it blocks, allowing it to hose a board of tokens effectively by itself. It also goes around nuking your board if you try to get rid of it with damage-based removal, making it very hard to answer without some more specific options like Fall of the Week. Sure, it does give strength decks more of a fighting chance against the absolute monster that is bulk aggro, but not in a healthy way. When bulk as a hero inevitably gets knocked down a peg, I expect a nerf to this will follow suit to try and curb heavy matchup polarity. And for the last card of the week, Izar-hauts Caretaker gives us a new, powerful, high-cost unit with a new standard environment. On average, this card is giving your board a +3/+3 buff, sometimes even +4/+4, which is huge. Caretaker looks to be an incredibly strong game ender for both mid-range and board-based control decks, possibly giving it a home as a dot staple. Its status as a board wipe buff could even allow it to work in slower bullet lists, as his incredibly fast EXP gain allows the buff to scale higher than it would for most other heroes. Some builds of Kyungmi might also want this due to the hero's non-traditional level structure, allowing you to squeeze even more buffs out of this thing. Overall, I like Caretaker. It's simple, it packs a punch, and it fills the spot in the card pool that's relatively sparse at the moment. Just the right kind of card to kick off the new rotation. Now, looking at the first week of the new standard in its entirety, it's okay, but personally, I want something a bit stronger. I would have liked for the infinities to be spread out a bit more. Seriously, there were way too many spirit cards this week, and there are a few designs I don't care for here, namely Atomic Resuscitation and Gestating Aberrant. But I think Gemhawk and Caretaker are both bangers that'll shake up deck building, and I'm hoping for a buff to Smoke Step Oni because it looks fun, but it's very weak right now. All in all, not a bad week. I'm looking forward to what the collective community has in store for us in the coming weeks. Speaking of which, now's about the time we take a look at the collective subreddit, past and present. Looking at the current week, we have Lumia Housekeeper, a cute and interesting utility unit. Lumia's primary objective is in cleaning up your hand of cards you can't play by letting you draw a new card instead, albeit only once per turn. I can see this being used in aggro decks with an overall low curve, but with a few high drops, with Lumia improving your draws for the early turns, which are the most crucial for ensuring you can maintain pressure on the opponent. Another facet of this card is that it places the unwanted cards on the bottom of your deck, which can open up some synergies with Fortuno. I think this is a very cool and unique way to make a consistency tool, and it could lead to some interesting deck building. Keep it up, Space Turtle! Next, we have Shambling Soul, a relatively unassuming French vanilla. 4 mana for a 1/8 with Regenerate is a really good deal, acting as a massive wall that can block almost anything in the game for free. This massive stat line also makes it a nice target for slapping buffs on it to potentially give it an offensive edge. Personally, I think now is a better time than ever to print French vanillas, where the overall power level is low and the synergy is next to non-existent. An environment like this allows a card like Shambling Soul to truly shine, which is a rarity nowadays. My one worry is that this might become too good of a stat stick later down the line, depending on what kind of buffing effects are printed. I can see this card being particularly nasty if you could put Duelist on it with an attack booster too. Also, for future reference to Silverline, in our game, Spectre is spelt with an RE at the end rather than an ER. And for the last post of this week, we're looking at Terrible Toxin, another poison design. Now, I think the concept is interesting, that of a card that breaks one of your opponent's future draws. As much as I don't like poison as a keyword, I think this is a compelling way to make use of it. However, this type of effect has no place on a 1-mana unit, especially not when the unit is only paying 1 stat point for this effect. When the effect is this cheap, it becomes way too easy to effectively draw lock your opponent in the early game by playing a bunch of these in succession. Personally, I like to see it scaled up to a 3-drop, where I believe an effect of this caliber would be more reasonable. Balance gripes aside, I do think Toxin is actually a cool use of the poison keyword, and would be interested in seeing this in-game after some heavy balance tweaking. Now looking at the previous week, we have Tom Sonic's Sphere of Knowledge. This upgrade to meticulous research as an element of versatility by letting you turn some of your cards into removal after you draw. This factor of the card prevents it from being a dead card in your hand in the event of you not needing to draw more cards. You could also use the discard effect to filter out cards you don't need and turn them into something useful. Is the removal aspect enough to make the card usable where meticulous research isn't? Honestly, I'm not quite sure, but I'd be eager to find out. Next, we have Alheim's Alacrity, a curious multifaceted buff/removal action from Spikebird. This card has 2 sides, a simple +1/+1 buff and a ping to any exhausted unit. Now, while this card is very flavorful, it is also very undercurve in both modes. The buff part of the card could absolutely give an extra stat point, either attack or health, depending on what Spikebird wants that side of the card to do. Now the other half of the card should have a much larger payoff, especially due to how difficult it is to trigger the condition. I think 2 damage is more reasonable, though there is certainly an argument that it could do 3 damage, but I'd be a bit more wary about going through with that. Overall, the card is a cool idea, it's just incredibly weak at the moment, and I would love to see a repost with some balance tweaks. Finally, we end this section with Shock Slugger, another Spikebird design. Funnily enough, this card is actually quite similar to the previously mentioned Slag Slammer in a lot of ways, with both being low to mid cost strength units with rage effects based around dealing with swarms of smaller units. Overall, I think Slugger is a much fairer way to go about this type of design, and is also just a very solid duelist and buff target. This, along with Slammer, once the latter is properly balanced, can serve as a nice strength anti-token core, or even form the basis for a new raged-focused archetype. Simple and effective designs like these are nice to have, especially in a low synergy card pool, such as our current one that allows them a place to shine, and I'd like to see this card tried again for that reason. Overall, I think both the current week up for voting and the previous week have a lot of really interesting designs. I'm a fan of how Lumia and Sphere of Knowledge present neat ways to approach both card advantage and card filtering. These weeks are also host to cool concepts like Terrible Toxin and Alheim's Alacrity, even if the cards those concepts are attached to could use a bit of fine-tuning. I can just feel the raw creativity of these designers, both new and old, just hopping out of my computer screen and slapping me in the face. But I think we've talked about cards enough for one day, so let's talk about other collective creations and events in the Collective Showcase. Let's start by discussing official collective events, starting with the fact that new rotation is real. That's right, a few weeks ago, Collective experienced a total standard card pool wipe, leaving only a curated core set consisting of many cards from Collective's past. Along with this new rotation came two major rules changes, those being the removal of Summoning Sickness, allowing more units to be more impactful and faster, and the removal of multi-blocking, which lessens the effect of board clogging and makes Overrun a lot stronger than it used to be. These changes with the rotation have given Collective a fresh start card pool wise, while making the general turn-to-turn gameplay more dynamic. Though, for anyone who missed the old cards, don't worry, because Collective has also added Legacy Versus, allowing you to battle against other players using every card ever added to the game. As well, today marks the beginning of the third Collective card back competition, where you can create your own card back and submit it to the competition, where the community will vote on it to see if it will be added as an official card back. The submission period ends on March 4th at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Rules can be found in the announcement channel of the official Discord, link in the description. Now with a new standard comes a new metagame, so how about we look at some new standard deck lists made by the community. Before I begin, all deck lists shown here can be found on Sevas' Deckbuilding site, the ultimate place for brewing and sharing deck lists for Collective, link also in the description. First, let's take a look at Lovepawn's Bullock aggro deck, also known as Zero Head Bullock. The deck uses a combination of generally good 1-drops, cards designed to fill the board like Affectionate Farmer and Flamp, and board buffers such as Heartbeat and Flag Bearers. The deck also runs Rock Slide as a form of board interaction, and Data Disruption to help deal with control decks by discarding key removal or top ends. Recently, Bullock aggro in general has risen to be considered the top deck by many, primarily due to the strength of Bullock as a hero, with quick and easy EXP gain and a powerful level 3 that gives his units +1 attack for the rest of the game, allowing Bullock to run down the enemy before they get a chance to deal with the sheer onslaught he's putting out. Lovepawn has also created variants of this deck teched against the top Helldom and Marie decks respectively. On the opposite end of the speed spectrum, we have Ovrictic, created by yours truly. This mid-range / control deck is centered around the titular O Celestial Hatcher, using its effect to fetch out powerful 5-drops directly from your deck to turn the game in your favor. The deck's core consists of O itself, 1 or more 5-drops, and ramp cards like New Horizons and Yearly Festival Day. Everything else in the deck can be changed depending on the metagame, but generally you want cards that will either keep you alive, such as removal or life gain, along with cards that will increase your chances of seeing O and your ramp, since your win rate goes down a bit without those. Of course, the deck's main weakness is its lack of actual early game board presence due to running no units that cost less than 5, which leads to a generally poor matchup into aggro decks. Overall, it's a quirky and flexible deck that I'm excited to see how it develops as more cards are added to the game. And finally, we have the glorious creation known as Dinosaur Hawkins by Wujek Marion. Dino Hawkins is a rather unconventional tribal deck that uses EXP and mana ramp to accelerate into Hawkins' level 3, allowing him to pay 1 mana to put the bottom unit from his graveyard into play of his main tribe. In this case, Dinosaur. This allows Hawkins to play powerful top ends like Berserk Tyrannodon and Farog Dreadclaw for only 1 mana, which can swing games if the graveyard is set up correctly. Unfortunately, the deck massively suffers from a lack of consistency and the fact that the deck is mediocre at best outside of power plays with Hawkins active. While this deck is far from meta-defining, it's fun and interesting, and the deck already has spawned numerous designs that seek to provide support for dinosaurs as a tribal deck, something which I never thought would happen. In my opinion, Dino Hawkins is a microcosm of all the reasons I love Collective, both as a card game and as a community experience. And that marks the end of today's episode of the Wanderstar Report. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the first episode of the Wanderstar Report. If you have any feedback, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear what the people think so I can improve my content for you, the viewer. In the description, you can find many helpful links related to Collective, including where to get the game and how to learn more about it. I look forward to seeing you all next week. This is Acoustic, signing off.